Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamit, Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Salman Sheikh, the Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed, New York City. Shalom to you all. We're recording this on day 320 of the war and 320 of the ordeal of the hostages. It almost seems that every day is getting filled with more and more anguish. This past week, the recovery of six hostages, the bodies of six hostages. And so again, we devote our Torah study in the sense of gaining comfort and gaining a sense of perspective for the experiences that Israel is going through, and by extension, the entire Jewish people. We have always our split screen, one on the Torah, on the text, and one on the world as we are experiencing it now. And so here we are with Parasha Ekev. We're moving through the book of Devarim, always reminding ourselves that we're listening to a set of speeches, long speeches. Moses is standing in front of the people as they're about to enter into the land. And let's just start with what the Parsha starts with. If you obey these rules and observe them carefully, the Lord your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers. Here, it says in verse 13, Va'ahevcha, he will favor you, Uverachecha, he'll bless you, V'yirbecha, he'll multiply you, Uverach privitnecha, bless the issue of your womb, Pri admatecha, digancha, v'tiroshcha, v'tzirecha, v'yitzarecha, the produce of your soil, your grain, wine, and oil, etc., etc., etc. Baruch tiyeh mikol hamim, you'll be blessed from all the peoples. So here we have as clear a statement as we could find, among other statements that you'll find in the book of Devarim in general. There are consequences for what you do. There are things that if you follow them, you will be blessed. And as we'll see quite graphically later on in the book, if you don't, you won't be blessed. You'll be cursed, in fact, or you'll be ejected.
Unblessed is the polite way of saying
you'll be unblessed. So the question, I want to ask a general question. Let's ask the general question, which is, what is the vision here? What's the vision of Devarim? What kind of person does Devarim want to cultivate? What kind of society does Devarim want to cultivate? And do we match that? I mean, are we anywhere close to that? I guess I'm going to start with you, Barry. Go ahead.
I had a feeling that might be the case. So I think that what strikes me listening to you introduce the Parsha as you did, Elliot, is that Devarim presents a certain kind of political society, which is quite different from the one that we come to know in Nevi'im and Ketuvim, where Israel will be ruled by first judges and then kings. And there's no question that the ruler is a human being. But I think the vision of Devarim is that God is the true leader of the Israelite people, and they are subject to his will. And his will is very clear. It is difficult, but as you mentioned, not without its rewards, and also with its curses when the rewards do not materialize. And I think that what we have here is an attempt to fashion a society that can perpetuate itself, because it's a society that's organized to live justly. And just societies have a much better track record of reproducing themselves than unjust societies. Unjust societies, you always have to wonder if the wheels are not coming off a little too quickly. But a just society, there's good reason to think that you can pass that on to the next generation because you have the mechanisms in place that will keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that Dvarim is about creating the just society or the just individual, or maybe I'll ask it this way: what are the components of the just society? What kinds of things do you have to do or what kinds of basic attitudes do you have to have? Does Dvarim answer these questions for us?
Well,
and
the primary one is that you have to reject idol worship.
okay.
And I think that's important if God is the ruler. I don't know that it's as big a sin when human beings are the rulers, although I could be completely wrong. Um, and I think that the society is one where people tend to each other and tend to the less fortunate among them. So, we were talking right before we started recording. So I mentioned verse 10, 17, and 18 that I think maybe summarizes, at least for the Parsha, what the program is. So chapter 10, verse 17 is Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei ha'Elohim v'Adonai ha'Adonim ha'el ha'gadol ha'gibor v'hanara asher lo yisaf anim v'lo yikach shochad, because the Lord your God, he is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great and wonderful Oz in more modern parlance, and he does not show favoritism and he does not take bribes. Oseh mishpat yatom ba'amanah, he does justice to the orphan and the widow. Vohev ger latet lo lechem v'simlah, and he loves the resident alien and gives him bread and clothing. And I think that it's the attention given to the least fortunate on one hand, and the importance of preserving justice on the other that creates the divine society.
So in other
And I
words,
want to I
go
want to
ahead.
reinforce that with another comment from later on in the book of Deuteronomy, which we'll see in 2 more weeks, Parshat Shoftim. I agree with Barry that the idea is that we are a society beholden to God. This biblical religion is all about covenant. We made a deal. We are loyal to God. There are things that God does for us and things that we do for God. That's how the covenant part works. But part of it is, to borrow a Kabbalistic phrase, as below, so above. That there are certain parallel structures. So if the divine is wonderful and great, El Gadol Gibor Vanora, I'll have more to say about that in a little bit later, but does not show favor and takes no bribe. So later on, Parshat Shoftim will say, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sharecha. You need to have judges and magistrates who will create a society that enforce these principles that you said of caring for the vulnerable. V'shaftu adam mishpat tzedek, they shall judge the people according to the standard of righteousness. Lo tatem mishpat v'lo takir panim v'lo tikach shochad. Don't pervert justice. Do not show favoritism. Do not take any bribes. Ki hashochad yaver einei chachamim v'yisalef divrei tzadikim. Because a bribe will blind the eyes of the wise and distort the words of the righteous. Tzedek tzedek tirdo. You should pursue justice diligently. So I think that we are seeking a comprehensive, just society that will institute its care for the vulnerable, that will live out a sense that they live by a yardstick that is not just human self-interest, but is truth and honesty and goodness and care and chesed. And that's I think the overall, are they seeking a just individual or a just society? Yes, the answer is yes. That just individuals make up just societies, which make up a just nation, which worships the Almighty.
So can we just connect the dots between idolatry and and creating a just society? Or to what extent is idolatry, the foundation of an unjust society? To what, and why is the Torah so concerned about idolatry? Idolatry, it seems, is so far removed from our lives, and yet, one can argue that idolatry is quite close to our lives and quite close to every human being. And that, I would just throw out the idea that idolatry is really not the worship of, a piece of sculpture. Idolatry is the condensation of power, that is the adoration of power, and specifically human power. or things represented by human beings who have power. And
Well, our parsha has a great illustration of something like this, you know, and if I can make one sort of larger point, Deuteronomy is gonna give us a lot, and including in this parsha from which the second paragraph of the Shema comes. You know, I described this covenant. I described that God does things for us and we do things for God, and that's a kind of reciprocal and covenantal religion that you might find very meaningful. I find very meaningful, but the not so nice way to say that is that it's kind of transactional. So when it is oriented towards goodness and duty and virtues, that's great. When it's oriented towards self-interest, I'm doing the mitzvot because the Torah says that it'll make the land fruitful and we'll have lots of children, lots of animals, lots of grain. That's not that's a potentially idolatrous way of talking about doing the mitzvot. So what I would like to say as a modern person is that real idolatry is about identifying the lower motive and identifying with the maximally good. The distortion of the instrumental and elevating it to the really good, to the truly good. So in our parsha, it describes that they will, that as God, womped up on the Egyptians, God will womp up on your enemies now, and will you'll be able to defeat them. And then chapter 7, verse 25. Psilei Elohim tisrufun ba'esh. Burn their idols. Okay, it's a little Taliban-y, but burn their idols. Here's the part I want to focus on. Lo tachmod kesev v'zahav alehem v'lakach galach. And don't decide that you want the pretty gold and silver parts that are overlaid on their idols, because no doubt they're very beautiful. They're the height of aesthetics and art that the ancient world could do. So you're destroying their idols. You don't want to have Baal, you don't want to have El, you don't want to have Dumuzi or whatever the other gods are. Watch out that you don't say, as you're destroying the idols, let me just pry the gold off here. Pen tivakesh bo, because you are likely to be caught in that trap. Ki toavat Adonai Elohechahu, God regards this as disgusting. Lo tavi toeva el beitecha. Don't bring that disgusting gold. I know it looks pretty, but it is a taint of a fundamentally wrong-headed, instrumental, self-interested desire in what should be a holy orientation. But you shall regard it as shaketz tishatzenu v'ta'evtit avenu. You shall regard it as completely reprehensible and not bring it into your own house. So I even though I'm quite sure that the original audience of Deuteronomy did have a lot of instrumentality in their religion, did have a lot of self-interest and reciprocity, and I do this so that God will give me what I want. I do think that the poetic possibility is also very, very rich in these parshiot to understand the challenges that we have in wanting that temporal power, temporal riches, temporal good stuff, instead of, and it blinds us to the grander aspirations.
I want to just point out that this language sounds a lot like taboo language, and of course I think in the tractate of Avodah Zarah, that deals with idol worship and what you're supposed to do with idols that you see or objects of worship. There is a lot of taboo kinds of rules there. Grind them up, take them down to the Dead Sea. In what way are you supposed to destroy them and not allow them to enter into your house? That these things are, there's no technical term for yucky or icky, right? But they give off a certain kind, they taint you, they stain you, they make your house, they defile you. I think that would be the most technical term, that having the presence of idolatry in your house is defiling, which it's comical in the sense that, we go to all sorts of places as tourists and we collect all sorts of tchotchkes, some of which are, deities of But it's they're more like souvenirs and not idolatry. I don't know, but
Can I just say one thing about that phrase? I said tishaksenu ta'eb titavenu. Hillel Halkin, is Israeli American Israeli writer who does the column called Philologos. It's on Mosaic and used to be in the Forward, I think, has a fabulous piece that there are these Spanish Catholics. They don't know what they're saying, but when they go into a church, they say something like "Sakes sakenu ta'eb tabenu."
yeah,
And
I remember that
what is that?
article.
What does it mean? And so I don't know what it means. It's a family tradition. It's not Latin, but we just say it when we go into a church. It's some sort of act of devotion. What it actually is this pasuk. Their converso ancestors, their secret Marano Jewish ancestors, they were forced to go to church, but when they went in the church, they said "Shaketz tishaksenu ta'ev titavenu." They regarded it as a total disgrace. And now 500 years later,
Well,
they're
actually,
still say it.
Elliot, I wanted to suggest that there is a word for yucky and icky in this context, and it's treif. And the reason why treif works is because the idols are forbidden to Jews, but not to non-Jews. Just like non-kosher food is permitted to non-Jews, but forbidden to Jews.
Well, under the 7 laws of Noah, would idolatry be permitted?
Yeah.
Well, so what I want to make a comment about idolatry as well. And I think that we need to separate perhaps idolatry from pagan religion. I think that the real issue is pagan religion. And in 2024, it's easy to forget that there's a vast gulf between a belief in one God and a belief in more than one God. Because when you have one God, you can have a ruler or the ruler over all. The problem with pagan religion is that all the forces are localized in specific gods. And biblical religion is everything is focused in the one God. And idolatry, I would suggest, is kind of a tool, not necessarily the real issue. It's a manifestation of pagan religion, but it's not quite the same thing as the religion itself. I realize I'm not being quite clear here, but
look, I mean, it's interesting because the topic, I think, really puzzles a lot of us, puzzles a lot of the people that we interact with, simply because we think that we've eradicated idolatry out of human civilization, or we've eradicated the idolatrous impulse, which is clear that we have not. I mean, celebrity culture, technological culture. I mean, anything you want to, put in the blank there. These are things that it's not that we worship them; it's that we do organize our lives around them to the extent that we spend hours and hours and hours of our time and tremendous amounts of money and energy, not in devotion to these things, but in the pursuit of these things. And so, in when we organize our lives around things that are not God, well, that's what the Torah would call idolatry, I guess. All right. Well, let's ask another question then that Deuteronomy is asking, and Moses is asking, and here again, we have to appreciate he was a pretty good speaker, I guess, unless, of course, you think that the people got tired of him. But there are a couple of rhetorical flourishes in the book of Deuteronomy that work. I'm thinking specifically of chapter 10, verse 12, where he turns to the people and he says, "Va'ata Yisrael," and now Israel, "Ma Adonai Elohecha shoel me'emach." What does God want of you? Ki im li'yirat Adonai Elohecha, to revere God, lalechet b'chol drakav, to walk in his ways, ula'ava oto, and to love him / be devoted to him, lavod et Adonai Elohecha, serve God, b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha. That's it. That's what God wants, right? Well,
no, but it's with your entire being. You
right.
can't come only partly to God.
Okay.
He doesn't take half measures.
So what's the best way to translate that to our audience? How do we say to people, this is what God wants of you. God wants you to revere. I mean, it's what I'm asking is because sometimes religious language is so off-putting to a modern audience. And to get people to even say God, or to even say, that God belongs in your life, or that God makes demands on you, or that you are accountable to God, or that you are supposed to revere God, and you are supposed to walk in God's ways, you might as well be talking in a different language. These are very difficult concepts for people who say, I just want to have a life. I just want to enjoy myself. I just want to make a living. I want to have a family. I want to, I want
By
to
the way,
just be happy.
we're not against those things, but those things that make up human thriving, we're for those things. But we are also insistent, I mean, not just Judaism and Jewish teachers, but the world's religions, for the most part. There may be some things that you object to about this one or that one, or our own. But we believe that God is in favor of human thriving, but that's not the extent of what it is that God could demand of people. The whole point is not merely human thriving. There is, in fact, some demand beyond human thriving, because sometimes you might have to set aside some of your own personal thriving, or even your communal thriving, to do something like, as you read, that God is, loves the ger, latet lo lechem v'simla. God loves the vulnerable to give them food and clothing. And, let's just say that you are in your own kind of small, vulnerable society. And you might say, well, why on earth would I give that stranger over there food and clothing? That's just going to diminish my own thriving. And we have a religion that calls upon you to understand that your thriving is a good thing, but it's not the goal. It's not the whole goal. I find that, first of all, there's lots of reasons why, modern people, even on a superficial level, have, rejected the idea of God, or don't want to talk about God, or we talk about God like a great big, Santa Claus, or a great big cosmic vending machine that if you put the right stuff in, you'll get the right stuff back out, and that God is like a pharmacist, and if you say I got this problem, then here's the prescription, and those things aren't a great foundation for a spiritual life. And so people think that they don't believe in God, but they do believe in many of the other things that are part of what a mature and spiritually deep relationship with God is, like moral facts and a kind of natural law. And when people sometimes displace the ideas that I would say are part of a religious worldview on those other things, but I don't believe in God, because they don't want to think that they believe in, they don't want to think that God wrote the Torah, or makes it rain, or decides which person with cancer gets better and which person doesn't. Those are things that you shouldn't believe in. But there is a transcendent meaning, that's what I believe, that is more than just human thriving. Human thriving is good, but it's not the whole point.
Maybe maybe it's, they don't want to be associated with those people who do, because there's something profoundly shameful in their own minds about themselves, or about those people who do. I mean, there's nothing that defames God and godly behavior than people who profess to be godly doing terrible things. And I think, we ought to give some space for people who are, who find this deeply problematic because of the people who profess it. It's not the Judaism that they're not the ideas, but it's the hypocrisy of those who profess in such piety and behave in ways that just, shall we say, are less than pious, I suppose. That the reputation of God is defamed by so-called godly people acting in ungodly ways. I don't know, Barry, if you
No,
have
we have a word for that.
Yeah, there's no question about that. What I wanted to add is that I said often that religion teaches the attitude of gratitude, that it's a way of conveying thanks. And I think religion begins with the recognition that because we did not will our lives into existence, that our individual lives are a gift. And the consequence of the gift is that, unlike gifts exchanged between human beings, we have obligations to the gift giver. And that obligation is that if we think that life is good, we have an obligation to live a good life. And the consequence of the gift means that we're not entirely responsible or determinative of what constitutes the good life. We also have an idea that God has a definition of a good life that we seek and pursue. And, the different ways that we seek and pursue in some ways accounts for the different religions. But I think that if we keep in mind that our life is a gift and that we can live a good life and that our good life cannot be solely determined by ourselves, because I think certainly Western religion has a strong element of transcendence in it, that we have to figure out how we fit into a notion of God's good life.
Well, speaking of things that we are grateful for in this parsha, we would be remiss if we didn't spend the last few minutes on the land. There are at least two descriptions of the land of Israel, the distinctiveness of the land, the extraordinariness of the land that I think shaped the Jewish imagination. The first is in chapter 8, Eretz Chita Usorah, a land of wheat and barley, vines and figs and pomegranates, land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, whose rocks are iron, and from whose hills you can mine copper. And then from there you get Ve'achalta v'savata v'rachta, from, which we quote all the time when we recite Birkat HaMazon. The second description of the land is, the land that you're about to enter is not like the land of Egypt. It's in chapter 11, verse 10. Loch Eretz Mitzrayim hi asher yatzata misham. It's not like Egypt. It's not, you don't have to work to irrigate it. I'm just going to go to the verse 12. Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota. It's a land which God, here he translated, looks after, on which the Lord your God always keeps his eye from year's beginning to year's end. Just want to comment for a second on Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota tamid. Einei Adonai Elohecha ba merishit hashana v'ad acharit hashana. How do these ideas resonate in the Jewish imagination about the land? The land is different. The land is, I mean, we live in the United States of America. Some of us came from different countries. We live in a beautiful country. We live in a beautiful land. It's a big country. It's a big land. Lots and lots of different geological and meteorological and climate and all sorts of different kinds of regions. The bounty of this land is unbelievable. It's huge. Israel, the land of Israel, is tiny, small, and yet it has all of this variation in terms of climate, in terms of geology, in terms of water, in terms of, well, even I would say today, people, the greatest resource of the land, it's people. God is always looking at this land. That does mean God doesn't look at any other land? Or what is our self-perception of this land based on Deuteronomy? I don't know, Jeremy.
What I think is significantly hard to understand about this. I mean, you read the commentaries on the line that you just cited. The land is not like Egypt that you left, where you sow your seed and you water it with your feet, like a vegetable garden. The land where you're going is rivers and springs, and that God is seeking. Well, I'm pretty sure that in the land of Israel, we got a problem, which is that when it doesn't rain, the springs are empty and the wadis dry up, and so we're a little vulnerable. Whereas Egypt, the Nile River is like totally reliable, and it makes kind of no sense, or at least let's just say it's challenging to understand what it means that Egypt, oh man, that was terrible. Yeah, the land of Israel, this is going to be much better for growing stuff. The, factually speaking, the opposite, I think, is true. But the way the commentators read that you'll have to water it with your feet means that you will have to go to the Nile, pick up the buckets, carry them 10 more miles back to your field. And maybe that is a lot
Rather
of
than sit in your tent and wonder whether it's going to
No,
rain
whether
today.
it's going
so
to
I
rain.
think about it in different. So it's labor intensive, okay, but obviously working the land is labor intensive without manual irrigation. But it's a person who lives in the land of Israel is dependent on heaven. A person who lives in the land
Yeah,
of Egypt is dependent on the earth, and
yeah,
and that fundamental spiritual posture of always having to look to the heavens for rain, I think cultivates, so to speak, a different kind of religious personality.
100%. That is where we're going. It just strikes me as strange to think that that we have to denigrate the fruitfulness of Egypt. Uh, and I'm pretty sure the Egyptians, like the Mesopotamians, had canal systems and irrigation systems, and it probably wasn't so bad. But I totally agree with you that the message of the Bible here is this land is going to have all the seven species, the barley and the wheat and the olive oil, etc. And it is going to orient you towards that gratitude. Achalta v'sabata uverachta. You'll eat, be satisfied, and you'll have the gratitude.
I also think that part of what we're talking about is an economic system that is not centralized around a sovereign power. That the Egyptian system kind of enabled certain kinds of power to execute itself in that land. Think about, for example, Joseph. Joseph is a great example of here's the sovereign or the sovereign's assistant, the viceroy, basically exercising all sorts of power to centralize the production of grain so that all the wealth would be centralized in the royal household, and that by the end of the book of Genesis, the people are all indentured to the sovereign. That's not a good system, and it elevates human beings to positions of power and control over other human beings so that it can enslave people. So that I'm not saying it in the most general sense. The the river economy creates slavery. The rain economy is for freedom.
Well,
Just
because human beings cannot control the rain, right?
exactly.
In Egypt, whoever can control access to the Nile has all the power because there's nowhere else to go for your water.
Yeah.
But in a land like Israel, which is dependent upon the rain, no one individual can say, I'm responsible for the rain and I can make the laws as a result. And that's, I think, where the freedom comes from. But we shouldn't leave without noting that one of the great miracles of the modern state of Israel is what it's been able to do with the land, with all the difficult agricultural features that it has, with advances in irrigation and desalinization, and to export those to other countries as well. So that the land of Israel is not only a blessing in and of itself, it's become a blessing for a number of other countries throughout the world.
Well, there's a wonderful book on this. I don't know if you came across it. It's called "Let There Be Water." Let there be water. All about the quest for water and the water economy in Israel. On a trip that I took in 2018, I made a point of visiting a desalinization plant. I thought that was one of the most amazing experiences. We sat down, we got the tour. It was one of these plants in north of Tel Aviv, um, taking millions and millions of gallons of the seawater, taking the salt out of it, and then pumping it into the system in Israel. And that's nothing short of a modern miracle. I also remember going to one of to the there's it's the pumping plant in the Gali in the Kinneret. I forget the name of it, where the speaker got up and he said, "I'm a believing guy." He's one of these Israelis, bald, the very secular looking, And he says, I'm a believer. I'm a believer. Every time I turn the faucet on and water comes out, it's a miracle. Because they know exactly that many things could go wrong in water. Water is life, and water is part of it, and that connects us to.
You know that I recently read an article in the Times that NASA believes that they have detected. You can't prove this until you get to Mars, but
Yeah,
NASA believes that they have evidence of significant underground aquifers on Mars,
that's something
could, there could be any kind of life, growing around in there.
amazing. Well, on that speculative note, we will leave it. We thank our viewers and listeners. We've taken you all the way from coming into the land of Israel and accountability, idolatry, monotheism, to the reaches of the heavens. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next week of Parsha. Thanks again for watching and listening, and see you all. Have a wonderful Shabbat.
Shabbat
Shabbat.
shalom.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.